Tommy Chen clutched his worn backpack tighter as the alien patrol ship screamed overhead. The 12-year-old human boy pressed himself deeper into the rocky crevice, hoping the strange crystalline formations would hide his heat signature. 3 days had passed since the Drakari Empire's invasion fleet descended upon New Terra Colony, and Tommy was one of the few survivors still hiding in the mountain caves. The Drakari were unlike anything humanity had encountered before, standing 12 feet tall with scales that shifted between deep purple and crimson. They possessed wings capable of atmospheric flight and breathed a corrosive vapor that could melt through most metals. Their elongated skulls housed razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed like molten gold. To the terrified colonists, they looked exactly like the dragons from ancient Earth legends, except these dragons carried plasma weapons and commanded starships. Tommy's parents had been researchers at the xenobiology lab. When the first Drakari dropships landed, they had pushed him into an emergency escape pod with nothing but his school backpack and a promise they would find him. That was 3 days ago. Now, as he listened to the distant roars echoing through the canyon, Tommy knew his parents weren't coming. The boy's stomach growled painfully. His water had run out yesterday and the protein bars were gone. He had been moving deeper into the cave system, following underground streams, but each passage seemed to lead him further from any hope of rescue. The colony's distress beacon had gone silent on the second day, and no Federation ships had appeared in the ash-filled sky. A low rumble vibrated through the stone walls. Tommy froze, recognizing the sound of Drakari wing beats. They were close, too close. He grabbed his backpack and crawled deeper into the narrow tunnel, his small frame allowing him to squeeze through gaps the larger aliens couldn't follow. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, illuminated by phosphorescent fungi growing along the walls. Tommy gasped at the sight before him. The cavern was enormous, easily the size of a sports stadium with towering stone columns reaching toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Ancient carvings covered the walls, depicting scenes of creatures that looked remarkably similar to the Drakari. But what made his blood run cold were the 3 massive shapes resting in the center of the chamber. 3 adult Drakari lay in what appeared to be some kind of hibernation pose, their wings folded against their bodies and their breathing slow and rhythmic. Their scales had a different quality than the soldiers Tommy had seen during the invasion, darker and more iridescent, almost ancient-looking. Strange markings covered their hide, glowing faintly with an inner light. Tommy tried to back away quietly, but his foot dislodged a loose stone that clattered across the chamber floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the vast space. All 3 alien heads snapped up simultaneously, their golden eyes focusing on the small human boy with predatory intensity. The largest of the 3, a massive female with scars crisscrossing her snout, rose to her full height. When she spoke, her voice was like grinding stone mixed with the roar of a distant volcano. The universal translator in Tommy's backpack crackled to life, converting her words into heavily accented English. "A human whelp dares enter the sacred resting chamber of the Elder Clutch," she growled, smoke curling from her nostrils. "You desecrate this holy place with your presence, soft flesh." The second Drakari, distinguished by elaborate horn formations along his skull, circled to Tommy's left. The invasion protocol stated all humans were to be processed through the collection centers. How did this one escape our nets, Matriarch Vexthera? The third alien, slightly smaller but with more intricate scale patterns, blocked Tommy's retreat route. Perhaps the question is not how it escaped, but why it sought out this particular chamber. The ancient texts speak of omens involving the soft flesh species. Tommy's mind raced. These weren't ordinary soldiers like the ones who had attacked the colony. Their manner of speaking, their elaborate markings, and the reverent way they spoke of this chamber suggested they held some kind of religious or cultural significance. He remembered his mother's xenobiology lectures about how many species placed great importance on sacred spaces. I didn't know this was sacred," Tommy stammered, his voice barely a whisper in the vast chamber. "I was just trying to hide. I didn't mean any disrespect." Matriarch Vexithera's eyes narrowed. "Hide? From whom do you hide, young soft flesh? Your species' resistance was crushed days ago. Your warriors fell before our might like grass before flame." "I'm not a warrior," Tommy said, surprised by the steadiness that crept into his voice. "I'm just a kid. My parents were scientists. They studied other species to try to understand them better, to maybe find ways for different peoples to live together peacefully." The horned Drakari, who the matriarch had called Sage Korath, tilted his massive head. Scientists? Your parents sought knowledge of other species? For what purpose? Tommy thought of his mother's passion for xenobiology, her excitement when she discovered new forms of life, her belief that understanding led to peace. To learn, to teach. My mom always said that fear comes from not understanding, and understanding comes from listening to each other's stories. The third Drakari, scale singer Nethys, made a strange sound that might have been laughter. Stories? The soft flesh speaks of stories? How curious. It has been many cycles since anyone has spoken of the old ways in our presence. Matriarch Vexthara moved closer, her massive form blocking out the fungal light. You speak strangely for prey, young soft flesh. Your words carry echoes of the ancient protocols, though I doubt you understand their significance. Tommy backed against the cavern wall, his hand instinctively reaching into his backpack. His fingers closed around something familiar and comforting. A small object he had carried with him every day since learning to read. It was a battered paperback book, one of the few physical books remaining from Earth's literary heritage. His grandmother had given it to him before she died, telling him that stories were humanity's greatest treasure. I know stories, he said quietly, pulling the book from his pack. My grandmother taught me that every species, every people, every individual has stories that make them who they are. She said that sharing stories is how we really get to know each other. The three ancient Drakari exchanged glances that seemed to carry volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Matriarch Vexthara settled into a resting position that brought her massive head closer to Tommy's eye level. Then speak, young storyteller, she rumbled. You have entered the sacred chamber of the Elder Clutch. By ancient law, you must either face judgment for your trespass or invoke the right of tail weaving. Choose wisely, for one path leads to swift death and the other— She paused, her golden eyes gleaming with something that might have been curiosity. The other has not been invoked for over 1,000 cycles. Tommy stared at the three massive beings surrounding him, his small hands trembling as he held the worn paperback. The weight of their attention felt like being studied by living mountains. He had no idea what the rite of tail weaving meant, but it sounded infinitely better than facing judgment for trespassing in their sacred space. I choose the rite of tail weaving, he said, his voice barely echoing in the vast chamber. Sage Korath's horned head tilted in what might have been approval. The soft flesh shows wisdom beyond its years. Very well, young storyteller. But know this, the rite of tail weaving is not merely speaking words into the air. It is a sacred binding, older than our empire, older than our conquest of the stars. Scale singer Nethys moved to light several crystalline formations around the chamber. As her claws touched each crystal, they began to glow with soft, warm light that painted dancing shadows on the ancient carvings. The chamber must be properly prepared for the ritual. It has been 1,347 cycles since the rite was last invoked. Matriarch Vexthara's massive form settled into a ceremonial position. Her wings folded in a specific pattern that Tommy somehow sensed was deeply significant. Listen well, young soft flesh. The rite of tail weaving binds both teller and listeners. You must tell us a story, but not just any story. It must be one that reveals the heart of your species, that shows us who humans truly are beneath their flesh and fears. Tommy looked down at the book in his hands. It was a collection of fairy tales from Earth, stories his grandmother had read to him when he was younger. He had kept reading them even as he grew older, finding comfort in their familiar rhythms and timeless truths. But would ancient alien dragons understand human fairy tales? If I tell you a story, Tommy said carefully, what happens then? Do you let me go? The three Drakari exchanged those meaningful glances again. It was Sage Korath who answered. If you successfully complete the rite of tail weaving, if your story truly reveals the essence of your species and moves our hearts, then yes, you will be free to leave. But more than that, young storyteller, by ancient law we would be bound to consider what your tale teaches us about humanity. And if I fail? Tommy asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Failure in the rite of tail weaving is not judged by the story's success or failure within its own world, scale singer Nethys explained, her voice carrying an oddly musical quality. Failure comes from telling a story that reveals nothing true about your people, or from trying to deceive us with false tales meant only to save your life. Matriarch Vexthara's golden eyes fixed on Tommy with laser intensity. But know this, young one. We are ancient. We have heard thousands of stories from dozens of species across the galaxy. We can sense truth from falsehood, Depth from shallow words meant only to manipulate. Choose your tale carefully. Tommy opened the book, his fingers trailing over the familiar pages. Stories of brave knights and clever princesses, of talking animals and magical transformations, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when faced with impossible odds. Which story could possibly show these ancient beings who humans really were? His eyes fell on one particular story and something clicked in his mind. It wasn't one of the famous ones like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. It was a smaller story, one his grandmother had always said was her favorite because it showed what people could become when they chose love over fear. "I want to tell you the story of Beauty and the Beast," Tommy said, settling cross-legged on the chamber floor. The three Drakari leaned forward slightly, their massive forms creating an intimate circle despite their size. "This is a story from my world," Tommy began, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. "It happened long ago in a time when magic was more common and the boundaries between the possible and impossible were not so firmly drawn." As Tommy spoke, something remarkable began to happen. The ancient carvings on the chamber walls started to glow softly, responding to his words in a way that seemed almost alive. The Drakari noticed too, their eyes widening with what might have been surprise or recognition. "There once was a merchant who had 3 daughters," Tommy continued, unaware of the growing luminescence around him. "The youngest was called Beauty, not just because she was lovely to look at, but because she saw beauty in everything around her, even in things others found frightening or ugly." He told them about the merchant's misfortune, how he lost his ships and wealth, forcing his family to move to a simple cottage in the countryside. He described Beauty's acceptance of their new life, her willingness to work hard and find joy in simple things while her sisters complained about their reduced circumstances. The Drakari listened with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Tommy had never had such focused attention from anyone, let alone beings who could probably incinerate him with a breath. But as he spoke, he began to sense something unexpected from them, a hunger that had nothing to do with physical appetite. They were starving for story, for connection, for something his words were providing. When he reached the part where Beauty's father became lost in the forest and found the beast's castle, Tommy noticed that matriarch Vexithara's breathing had changed, becoming slower and more rhythmic. Her eyes never left his face, but there was something almost vulnerable in her expression. "The beast was terrible to look at," Tommy said, his voice carrying all the emotion he could muster. "Huge and hairy, with claws and fangs and a roar that shook the castle walls. He was everything that Beauty's father had been taught to fear. But he showed mercy to the lost merchant, giving him shelter and food, asking only for a single rose from his garden in payment." Scale singer Nethys made a soft sound, almost like a sigh. "A single rose," she murmured. "Such a small thing to ask." Tommy continued with the familiar story, but as he spoke he began to understand why his grandmother had loved this tale so much. It wasn't really about magic or curses or transformations. It was about looking beyond surface appearances, about finding the person inside the frightening exterior, about love that grew from understanding rather than fear. When he described Beauty's decision to take her father's place as the beast's prisoner, Sage Korath leaned forward. "She chose to sacrifice herself for another. This is unexpected, but that's just who Beauty was," Tommy explained. "She couldn't let her father suffer for her sake. And she wasn't really sacrificing herself. She was choosing love over fear. She was choosing to see past what the beast looked like to who he might be underneath." As the story progressed, Tommy found himself getting lost in the telling. He described Beauty's gradual realization that the beast, despite his frightening appearance, was kind and gentle and intelligent. He spoke of their conversations over dinner, their walks in the garden, the way the beast tried so hard to make Beauty happy despite his own pain. The chamber's ancient carvings were now glowing brightly enough to illuminate details Tommy hadn't noticed before. The scenes depicted on the walls showed creatures that looked remarkably like Drakari, but they were engaged in activities that seemed peaceful, even nurturing. They were teaching smaller beings, sharing knowledge, creating art and music. "The beast had been cursed," Tommy continued, his voice barely above a whisper now, "transformed from his true self by someone who judged him for his pride and cruelty. But Beauty's love was breaking that curse, not through magic words or special potions, but through seeing him as he truly was inside." Matriarch Vexthera's massive head drooped slightly. A curse, she repeated softly, transformed by judgment into something fearsome and terrible. Tommy nodded, not fully understanding the weight behind her words, but sensing their importance. The curse could only be broken when someone loved him not despite what he looked like, but because of who he was inside. Beauty saw past the frightening exterior to the gentle soul underneath. As he neared the story's climax, Tommy felt something shift in the chamber. The three ancient Drakari were no longer just listening. They were hanging on every word as if their lives depended on it. The chamber fell into absolute silence as Tommy reached the story's turning point. The glowing carvings on the walls seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat, casting shifting patterns of light across the three ancient Drakari. Their golden eyes reflected the luminescence, making them appear almost otherworldly in their intensity. Beauty lived in the Beast Castle for many months, Tommy continued, his voice carrying clearly in the vast space. At first she was afraid, just like anyone would be. But every day the Beast showed her kindness. He gave her books to read, beautiful gardens to walk in, anything that might make her happy. He never demanded anything from her except her company at dinner, and even then, he would let her leave if she seemed uncomfortable. Scale Singer Nethys shifted her massive form, the sound of her scales scraping against stone echoing softly. The Beast sought nothing for himself? No tribute, no submission? Only friendship, Tommy replied. That's what made Beauty begin to see him differently. He could have used his power to force her to do anything he wanted. But he didn't. Instead, he asked her about her day, listened to her thoughts about the books she read, and told her stories about the world beyond the castle walls. Sage Korath's horned head tilted thoughtfully. The Beast possessed great power but chose restraint. This speaks of wisdom, not weakness. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Beauty started to realize that the Beast was the kindest person she had ever met. He was gentle with the servants who had also been caught in the curse. He cared for injured animals in the forest. He had a library full of books from every corner of the world because he loved learning about different peoples and cultures. Matriarch Vexithara's breathing had become even slower, more meditative. Knowledge of other peoples, she murmured. Yes, this Beast was wise in ways that matter. As Tommy continued the story, he noticed that the three Drakari were responding to different parts with unexpected emotion. When he described how Beauty began to look forward to her evening conversations with the Beast, Scale Singer Nethys made a soft, almost musical sound. When he told how the Beast would ask about her dreams and fears, treating her thoughts as precious gifts, Sage Korath's eyes seemed to grow brighter. But then Beauty had a dream about her father, Tommy said, his voice dropping to create dramatic tension. She saw him lying sick and alone, calling her name. She begged the Beast to let her go home to help him, even though she knew she might never see the Beast again. She chose to leave? Matriarch Vexithara asked, and there was something almost like pain in her massive voice. The Beast could have said no, Tommy explained. By the rules of the curse, Beauty was bound to stay with him. But he loved her too much to keep her prisoner. He gave her a magic ring that would bring her back to the castle if she ever wanted to return, and he let her go, even though he knew it might mean his death. The chamber's carved walls now blazed with soft light, and Tommy could see the stories they told more clearly. The Drakari-like creatures in the ancient artwork were not the conquering warriors he had seen attacking his colony. They were teachers, healers, protectors. They were shown nurturing smaller species, sharing knowledge, creating beautiful works of art and music. Beauty found her father and nursed him back to health. Tommy continued, but she couldn't stop thinking about the Beast. She realized that somewhere in those months of conversation and companionship, she had fallen in love with him. Not with his appearance, which still frightened her sometimes, but with his gentle heart, his curious mind, his capacity for selfless love. Scale Singer Nethys leaned forward, her massive form creating shadows that danced with the wall carvings. Love born of understanding rather than mere attraction. This is a rare thing in any species. Beauty's sisters tried to convince her to stay home, Tommy said, getting caught up in the emotion of the story. They told her she was foolish to care about a monster, that she should be grateful to be free of him. But Beauty knew they were wrong. The Beast wasn't a monster. He was the most human person she had ever met. The word human hung in the air like a revelation. Tommy realized what he had just said, and looked up at the three ancient aliens surrounding him. Their eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Human. Sage Korath repeated slowly. You use this word to mean more than your species, young storyteller. Tommy thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. My grandmother always said that being human wasn't about what you looked like or where you came from. Being human meant caring about others, trying to understand them, choosing love over fear even when it was hard. Matriarch Vexithara's massive head moved in what might have been a nod. Continue your tale, young one. We would hear how this story ends. Beauty realized she had to go back to the beast, Tommy said, his voice strengthening again. She used the magic ring to return to the castle, but when she found him, he was dying. The curse was killing him because he believed she would never return, that no one could ever truly love him. The three Drakari had grown completely still, their breathing shallow as they waited for the story's conclusion. Beauty knelt beside the beast and told him that she loved him. Tommy continued, pouring all his emotion into the words, not despite what he looked like, but because of who he was inside. She loved his kindness, his wisdom, his gentle heart. And when she spoke those words, the curse was broken. The beast was transformed. Scale Singer Nethys asked softly. He became his true self again, Tommy said. But the important thing wasn't that he became handsome on the outside. The important thing was that someone had seen his true beauty and loved him for it. That's what broke the curse, being truly known and loved for who he was inside. Tommy closed the book gently, the sound echoing in the vast chamber. The carved walls continued to glow softly, and he realized that the story had somehow awakened something in this ancient place, some memory or recognition that had been sleeping for centuries, and they lived happily ever after. He concluded simply, not because everything was perfect, but because they had found something real in each other. Beauty learned that love means seeing past surface appearances to the heart underneath. The beast learned that he was worthy of love, that his past mistakes didn't define who he could choose to become. The silence that followed was profound. The three ancient Drakari stared at Tommy as if seeing him for the first time. Finally, Matriarch Vexithara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. This story, she said slowly, speaks of transformation, of curses that change beings into something they are not, of judgment that blinds us to true nature, of love that sees past fearsome appearances to gentle hearts. Sage Korath's golden eyes were bright with unshed tears. The soft flesh tells a tale of our own kind, though he knows it not. Tommy looked between the three massive beings, beginning to understand that something profound was happening. Your own kind? Scale Singer Nethys rose to her full height, her scales shifting color in the crystalline light. Long ago, young storyteller, before the Empire, before the conquest, before the endless wars, we were not as you see us now. We were teachers, explorers, nurturers of younger species. We sought knowledge and understanding across the galaxy. What happened? Tommy asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Matriarch Vexithara's massive form seemed to sag with the weight of memory. We were judged, young one, by species who saw only our size, our claws, our ability to breathe fire. They feared us before they knew us, attacked us before they understood us. In defending ourselves, we became what they believed us to be. Warriors, conquerors, monsters. Tommy felt tears starting in his eyes as he began to understand the terrible truth. You became cursed just like the beast. The weight of revelation settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Tommy stared at the three ancient beings before him, finally understanding why the story had affected them so deeply. The glowing carvings on the walls told the true history of the Drakari people, a history that had been buried beneath centuries of warfare and conquest. You were like the beast, Tommy whispered, transformed by how others saw you into something you never wanted to be. Matriarch Vexithara's massive form seemed to shrink somehow, as if the burden of memory was too heavy to bear standing upright. We were explorers once, young storyteller. We traveled the galaxy not to conquer, but to learn. Our greatest joy was discovering new forms of life, new ways of thinking, new stories that different species had to tell. Scale Singer Nethys moved to one of the carved walls, her claws tracing the ancient artwork with surprising gentleness. These carvings show our true history. Here you can see our ancestors teaching the Zilani how to harness their planet's geothermal energy. Here we are sharing our knowledge of stellar navigation with the Korthak traders. This image shows us helping the Miran colonies develop sustainable agriculture. Tommy approached the wall cautiously, his small hand reaching out to touch the glowing stone. The moment his fingers made contact with the carvings, images flashed through his mind like a vivid dream. He saw Drakari ships arriving at primitive worlds not with weapons and soldiers, but with teachers and healers. He watched as they shared technology and wisdom, asking for nothing in return but the chance to learn about each new species they encountered. "We were the gardeners of the galaxy," Sage Korath said, his voice heavy with loss. "We believed that knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied, that diversity of thought and culture made the universe richer and more beautiful." "What changed?" Tommy asked, though his heart was already breaking for the answer. Matriarch Vexithara settled into a resting position that brought her massive head closer to Tommy's level. "Fear changed everything. As our reputation as teachers and guides spread, so did fear of our physical power. We are large, young one. We breathe fire. Our claws can rend metal. To species that had never met us, we must have seemed like the monsters from their darkest legends." Tommy nodded, remembering his own first reaction to seeing the Drakari during the invasion. Even knowing they were intelligent beings, his primitive human brain had screamed dragon and filled him with terror. "The hegemony of worlds was the first to formally declare us a threat," Scale Singer Nethys continued. "They convinced dozens of species that we were simply waiting for the right moment to enslave them all. They pointed to our physical capabilities and asked how any peaceful species could have evolved such fearsome traits." Sage Korath's horned head shook slowly. "They could not conceive that a species might be both powerful and gentle. To them, strength automatically meant aggression. They saw our fire breath and assumed we were destroyers, never considering that the same flame that could melt steel could also warm a cold planet or power their cities." Tommy felt anger rising in his chest, not at the Drakari, but at the short-sighted species who had judged them so harshly. "So they attacked you first?" "The first strike came without warning," Matriarch Vexithara said, her golden eyes distant with memory. "A joint fleet representing 47 worlds appeared at our homeworld of Drakari's Prime. They demanded our immediate surrender and the dismantling of our entire civilization. When we attempted to negotiate, to understand their concerns and address them peacefully, they opened fire on our cities." The images flowing through the carved walls shifted, showing scenes of terrible beauty and devastating loss. Tommy saw Drakari cities that looked like crystal gardens, with soaring spires and graceful bridges spanning vast canyons. He watched as the bombardment began, reducing millennia of art and culture to smoking ruins in a matter of hours. "My grandmother was a scale singer like Nethys," Matriarch Vexithara continued. "She was in the Great Library when the first bombs fell, trying to save our cultural archives. The building collapsed around her, burying thousands of years of collected stories, songs, and knowledge from across the galaxy." Tommy wiped tears from his eyes. "I'm so sorry." "That's horrible. The worst part," Scale Singer Nethys said softly, "was that we still tried to respond with peace. Even as our cities burned, our leaders attempted to open diplomatic channels, to find some way to resolve the conflict without more bloodshed." Sage Korath's voice was bitter now. "But how do you negotiate with species who see you as monsters?" Every attempt at communication was interpreted as a threat. "Our diplomatic ships were destroyed the moment they appeared. Our peace envoys were killed before they could speak a single word." Tommy was beginning to understand the full tragedy of what had happened. "So you had to fight back?" "We had no choice," Matriarch Vexithara said. "After the third wave of attacks, after watching billions of our people die for the crime of existing while powerful, our survivors made a terrible decision. If the galaxy would only see us as monsters, then perhaps we needed to become monsters to survive." The carved walls now showed the transformation Tommy had suspected. He watched as the gentle, scholarly Drakari began building warships instead of exploration vessels. Their cities, rebuilt after the bombardments, became fortresses. Their children, who had once been taught art and science and philosophy, were now trained in warfare and conquest. "The curse was complete," Scale Singer Nethys said. "We became exactly what they had accused us of being. We conquered worlds not because we wanted to, but because we had learned that the galaxy only respected strength. We enslaved species not from cruelty, but because we could no longer trust anyone to see us as anything other than threats." Tommy sat down hard on the chamber floor, overwhelmed by the scope of the tragedy. "But some of you remember. Some of you know what you used to be. We few are the last of the elder clutch," Sage Korath explained. "We were alive before the transformation, before the curse of fear and judgment changed our people forever. We retreated to these sacred chambers to preserve the old memories, the old ways, hoping that someday we might find a path back to who we once were." "Is that possible?" Tommy asked. Can curses like this really be broken? Matriarch Vexithara's massive head turned toward him, and for the first time since entering the chamber, Tommy saw something like hope in her ancient eyes. Your story suggests it might be, young storyteller, but the beast's curse was broken by love, by someone who could see past his fearsome appearance to the gentle heart beneath. Who in this galaxy could ever love the Drakari as we truly are? Tommy stood up slowly, his young mind racing with possibilities. Maybe the question isn't who could love you. Maybe the question is who you could love first. The three ancient beings stared at him in surprise. Scale Singer Nethys was the first to speak. Explain your meaning, young one. In the story, the beast's curse wasn't really broken because Beauty loved him, Tommy said, the ideas crystallizing as he spoke. The curse was broken because the beast learned to love someone else more than he feared being hurt again. He let Beauty go even though it might mean his death. He chose love over fear. Sage Korath's eyes widened. The soft flesh speaks wisdom. The beast's transformation came not from being loved, but from loving. What if, Tommy continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction, what if the Drakari could break their own curse by choosing to love again? By choosing to see other species not as threats or enemies, but as people with their own stories, their own fears, their own capacity for both cruelty and kindness. Matriarch Vexthara rose to her full height, her massive form towering over Tommy but somehow no longer seeming threatening. You speak of a revolution more profound than any war, young storyteller. You speak of choosing to see with new eyes, to judge not by appearance or past conflicts but by present actions and future possibilities. Tommy nodded eagerly. My mom always said that understanding begins with listening to each other's stories. What if instead of conquering worlds, the Drakari started asking about their stories? What if instead of demanding surrender, you offered to share knowledge again? The chamber fell silent except for the sound of three massive hearts beating in synchronization. Finally, Scale Singer Nethys spoke, her voice filled with wonder. The rite of tale weaving is complete. The young storyteller has revealed the heart of his species. The belief that love and understanding can transform even the deepest curses. That redemption is always possible for those brave enough to choose it. But Tommy held up his hand, surprising himself with his boldness. Wait. I told you a story about my people, but I want to know more about yours. The rite of tale weaving, does it only work one way? The three ancient Drakari exchanged those meaningful glances again. But this time Tommy could sense something different in their silent communication. There was surprise, certainly, but also something that might have been joy. In all the centuries since the rite was last invoked, Sage Korath said slowly, no storyteller has ever asked to hear our tales in return. The ancient protocols speak of this possibility, but it has never occurred. Scale Singer Nethys rose gracefully, her massive form moving with surprising elegance as she approached the glowing wall carvings. The reciprocal weaving, she murmured, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline formations resonate musically. It is said that when storyteller and listener exchange tales with equal hearts, the very stones remember and sing. Tommy felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. I really do want to hear your stories. Not just the history of what happened to your people, but the stories that made you who you are. The stories you told each other before everything changed. Matriarch Vexithara's massive head lowered until she was at eye level with Tommy. Young one, our stories are not told in words alone. The Scale Singer earned her title because our tales are sung, woven with harmonics that speak to the heart as much as the mind. Are you prepared to experience a story as the Drakari tell it? Tommy nodded eagerly, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to. Yes, please. I want to understand. Scale Singer Nethys moved to the center of the chamber, positioning herself among the carved columns. As she began to speak, her voice took on qualities Tommy had never heard before. Deep resonant tones that seemed to come from the stone itself, higher harmonic frequencies that made his bones vibrate gently, rhythmic patterns that felt like a heartbeat shared across species. This is the song of the first garden, she began, and suddenly the chamber was filled with more than just her voice. The carved walls began to pulse with light and rhythm with her words, and Tommy found himself seeing the story as much as hearing it. He watched as the first Drakari emerged from the volcanic forges of their homeworld, not as the fearsome warriors he had seen during the invasion, but as beings of curiosity and wonder. Their ancestors had been solitary creatures, each guarding their own territory jealously. But something had changed them, evolved them beyond mere survival into something greater. The Great Awakening came when young Thesarhi found the crystal of many voices. Scale singer Nethys sang, her harmonics painting the story in light and sound. Hidden deep in the planetary core, it sang with the wisdom of ages, showing our ancestors that knowledge shared was power multiplied. Tommy saw it all through the magical resonance of her voice. Thesarhi, barely more than an adolescent by Drakari standards, had been exploring the deep caverns when she discovered a crystalline formation that hummed with strange energy. When she touched it, her mind was suddenly filled with visions of other worlds, other species, other ways of thinking and being. She could have kept the crystal's wisdom for herself, Sage Korath interjected, his voice adding deeper harmonics to the song. By the old ways, by the law of individual strength, the crystal was hers by right of discovery. But Thesarhi saw something greater in the visions, the beauty of diversity, the strength that came from unity without uniformity. The story continued through scale singer Nethys's incredible voice, showing how Thesarhi had convinced other young Drakari to join her in sharing the crystal's revelations. They learned to blend their individual strengths into something greater, discovering that when Drakari worked together, their natural abilities could nurture rather than destroy. The first garden was planted in the ruins of the old territorial boundaries, scale singer Nethys sang, and Tommy could see it blooming in the crystalline light. Where once our ancestors had fought over hunting grounds, the new generation created something unprecedented, a space that belonged to all and none, where knowledge could grow like living things. Tommy watched in wonder as the vision showed Drakari using their fire breath not as weapons, but as carefully controlled tools for cultivation. They heated soil to perfect temperatures for exotic plants from other worlds. They used their strength to shape stone into graceful terraces and flowing irrigation systems. Their keen intelligence allowed them to understand the complex relationships between different species of plants and animals. But the greatest discovery came when the first off-world visitors arrived. Matriarch Vexthera added her voice to the song, creating a three-part harmony that made Tommy's heart race with excitement. The Silthani traders, delicate as flower petals, terrified as newborn creatures when they first saw us. We appeared to them as monsters from their darkest legends. The vision shifted to show the first contact between the Drakari and the ethereal Silthani. The alien visitors were beautiful in their fragility, beings of gossamer and light who had never encountered a species as physically powerful as the Drakari. Their fear was palpable, their ships ready to flee at the first sign of aggression. Young Thesarhi, now grown wise in the ways of the garden, made a choice that would define our people for millennia. Scale singer Nethys sang, instead of demanding why they had come, instead of asserting territorial dominance, she offered them the greatest gift our people possessed. What gift? Tommy asked, completely absorbed in the story. A song. All three Drakari sang in unison, their combined voices creating harmonics so beautiful that Tommy felt tears streaming down his face. She sang them the song of welcome, the melody that says, "You are different from us, and that difference is precious. Teach us your ways that we might grow wiser together." The vision showed the moment of transformation. The terrified Silthani, expecting aggression or demands for tribute, instead heard music of such beauty and acceptance that their fear melted away, like ice in sunshine. They responded with their own songs, delicate melodies that spoke of gratitude and wonder. From that first exchange grew the Great Alliance, Sage Korath sang. Not an empire built on conquest, but a symphony built on harmony. Each species that joined us added their own voice to the song, their own wisdom to the garden. Tommy saw it all through the magical resonance of their voices. Hundreds of worlds linked not by force but by friendship. Drakari ships traveling between stars not as conquerors but as teachers and students both. Their strength used to protect smaller species from natural disasters and hostile environments. Their fire used to light beacons of learning that could be seen across star systems. We were the gardeners of the galaxy, scale singer Nethys sang, her voice now carrying undertones of profound loss. For 10,000 years we tended the growing symphony of civilizations, helping each find their own unique voice while harmonizing with the greater song. It was the most beautiful thing in the universe, Matriarch Vexthera added, her massive form trembling with emotion. Every day brought new discoveries, new friendships, new ways of understanding existence. We thought it would last forever. The song began to shift then, the harmonics taking on darker tones as the story moved toward its tragic transformation. Tommy could see the shadow falling across the garden, the fear beginning to spread among the newer species who had never known the Drakari before their reputation preceded them. The song of welcome became the song of suspicion, scale singer Nethys sang sadly. Species who had never experienced our friendship heard only whispers of our power. They saw our size, our claws, our fire, and could not imagine how such beings could be anything but threats. They forgot that the most beautiful gardens require the strongest guardians, Sage Korath added. They forgot that fire can warm as well as destroy, that strength can protect as well as conquer. The vision showed the growing paranoia, the secret meetings among species who had never bothered to actually meet the Drakari, but had decided they were too dangerous to exist. Tommy watched in horror as the beautiful symphony of civilizations began to fracture, discord creeping into what had once been perfect harmony. The last song of welcome was sung to the hegemony delegates, scale singer Nethys concluded, her voice breaking with grief. We offered them the same gift we had given to every species for 10,000 years, our friendship, our knowledge, our protection. They responded with weapons. The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of the crystal formations. Tommy sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the beauty and tragedy of what he had just experienced. Finally, he found his voice. "That's the most beautiful and terrible story I've ever heard," he whispered. "You were everything good that people could be, and they destroyed it because they were afraid." Matriarch Vexthera's golden eyes fixed on him with infinite sadness. "Now you understand, young storyteller. We were transformed not by magic, but by the curse of fear and misunderstanding. The gentle gardeners became the conquering empire because the galaxy would accept us as nothing else." Tommy stood up slowly, his young mind racing with the implications of everything he had learned. "But the song isn't really over, is it? You three still remember it. You still know who you really are underneath the curse." Scale singer Nethys tilted her massive head. "What are you thinking, brave young one?" Tommy looked up at the three ancient beings who had shared their most precious story with him. "I'm thinking, see?" Tommy's words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. The three ancient Drakari stared at him with expressions that shifted between hope and fear, wonder and disbelief. In the crystalline light of the chamber, they seemed caught between their true selves and the monsters they had been forced to become. "You speak dangerous words, young storyteller," Matriarch Vexthera said slowly. "Words that could change everything, or destroy what little remains of who we once were." Tommy felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but also a strange sense of clarity. "Change is scary," he admitted. "But isn't staying cursed forever even scarier? You've been carrying this pain for so long, hiding your true selves from the galaxy. What if you didn't have to anymore?" Scale singer Nethys moved closer, her massive form somehow seeming more graceful than threatening in the magical light. "The young one speaks of transformation, but he does not understand the cost. If we were to attempt what he suggests, if we were to reveal our true nature to the galaxy, we would be seen as weak. Our enemies would strike while we appeared vulnerable. But would you actually be weak?" Tommy asked. "Or would you be stronger than you've ever been? In my story, when the beast chose love over fear, he didn't become helpless. He became his true self, which was actually more powerful than the monster he'd been pretending to be." Sage Korath's horned head tilted thoughtfully. "The boy makes a point worthy of consideration. For centuries we have ruled through fear and force, but our empire is built on a foundation of resentment and barely controlled rebellion. True strength comes from willing cooperation, not forced submission." Tommy's eyes lit up with excitement as the ideas began flowing. What if the Drakari stopped being conquerors and became teachers again? What if instead of demanding tribute you offered knowledge? What if instead of enslaving worlds you invited them to join a new kind of alliance? "The young storyteller dreams beautifully," Matriarch Vexthera said, but her tone was sad rather than dismissive. "But he has seen only 3 ancient relics hiding in a sacred chamber. He has not seen the empire we have built, the billions of Drakari who know no other way than conquest and domination. How do you transform an entire civilization?" Tommy thought for a moment, remembering all the stories his grandmother had told him about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. "You start with one person, then another, then another. In my story, beauty didn't transform the whole kingdom all at once. She just chose to see one person differently and that was enough to break the curse. But we are not one person, Scale Singer Nethys pointed out. We are the rulers of a vast empire. Our choices affect billions of lives across hundreds of worlds. Then you have the power to save billions of lives, Tommy said with passionate conviction. If you three remember who the Drakari really are, then you can teach others to remember too. You can start singing the song of welcome again. The chamber fell silent as the three ancient beings contemplated his words. Finally, Sage Korath spoke. There would be resistance. Many of our people have known nothing but war for their entire lives. They have been taught that other species are either enemies to be conquered or resources to be exploited. And our enemies would not trust such a transformation, Matriarch Vexithara added. They would assume it was some kind of deception, a new strategy for conquest. Some would undoubtedly attack us during the transition, seeing it as weakness. Tommy felt his heart sinking. The obstacles seemed overwhelming. The challenge is too great for even these powerful beings to overcome. But then he remembered something else from his grandmother's stories. The heroes always faced impossible odds. That's what made them heroes. What if you didn't try to change everything at once? He suggested. What if you started small with just one world, one species? What if you proved that the change was real by your actions, not just your words? Scale Singer Nethys's eyes began to glow with something that might have been hope. A demonstration of intent. A single world where we could show our true nature, where other species could see that the ancient gardeners still exist beneath the conquering facade. But which world? Sage Korath asked. Which species would be willing to trust us enough to allow such an experiment? Tommy felt a strange chill run down his spine as an idea began to form. It was crazy, probably impossible, but it felt right in a way that made his heart race. What about here? What about New Terra Colony? The three Drakari stared at him in shock. Matriarch Vexithara was the first to speak. Young one, your colony was invaded 3 days ago. Your people are prisoners or refugees. Your world burns with the fires of conquest. But it doesn't have to stay that way, Tommy said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. You three have authority in the Empire, right? You could order the invasion stopped. You could release the prisoners. You could turn New Terra from a conquest into the first world of a new alliance. The military commanders would resist such orders, Sage Korath warned. They would demand explanations. They would question our authority to make such radical changes. Tommy felt tears starting in his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of desperate hope. Then you tell them the truth. You tell them about the rite of tail weaving. You tell them that a human boy entered your sacred chamber and reminded you who you really are. You tell them that the Drakari are choosing to become gardeners again. Scale Singer Nethys moved to the glowing wall carvings, her claws tracing the ancient artwork with reverent care. The prophecies speak of this moment, she said softly. The return of the song, when the gardeners would remember their true purpose. We always assumed it would come from within our own people. Maybe it had to come from outside, Tommy suggested. Maybe the curse could only be broken by someone who didn't know about it. Someone who could see you without all the history and fear and assumptions. Matriarch Vexithara rose to her full height, her massive form suddenly radiating power and purpose. If we do this, young storyteller, if we attempt what you suggest, there will be chaos. Some of our people will rebel against the change. Some of our enemies will see it as weakness and attack. Many will die before the transformation is complete. People are already dying, Tommy pointed out quietly. Your people are dying inside, having to be monsters when they want to be teachers. Other species are dying under conquest when they could be living in friendship. Sometimes the only way to stop the dying is to be brave enough to choose life. Sage Korath's golden eyes blazed with sudden determination. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years. We have lived with the curse for so long that we had forgotten there was any other way to exist. But the ancient songs remain, the old ways are not lost. Perhaps it is time to remember who we truly are. Scale Singer Nethys began to hum softly, a melody that seemed to awaken something deep in the chamber's crystalline formations. If we do this, if we attempt the return of the song, we will need allies. We will need species brave enough to trust us despite our fearsome reputation. Tommy wiped his eyes and stood as tall as his 12-year-old frame would allow. You'll have humans as allies. My parents always said that the best part of being human was our ability to change, to forgive, to see the good in others even after they've done terrible things. If you're really willing to become gardeners again, then humans will help you tend the garden. The three ancient Drakari looked at each other with expressions of profound communication. Finally, Matriarch Vexithara spoke. Then let it be so. By the ancient rites of the sacred chamber, by the power of the rite of tale-weaving, by the wisdom of a young storyteller who reminded us of our true selves, we choose transformation. We choose to break the curse of fear and hatred, Sage Korath added, his voice resonating with power. We choose to sing the song of welcome once again, Scale Singer Nethys concluded, her harmonics making the entire chamber ring like a bell. Tommy felt something shift in the very air around them, as if the universe itself was holding its breath to see what would happen next. The carved walls blazed with light so bright it was almost blinding, and for a moment, he could have sworn he heard the voices of thousands of other species joining in a cosmic song of hope and possibility. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Matriarch Vexthera's massive head lowered until she was eye level with him once again. Now, young storyteller, we discover whether curses can truly be broken by those brave enough to choose love over fear. Now we find out if the gardeners of the galaxy can bloom again from the ashes of empire. Tommy felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. And my colony? My people will be the first to see the true face of the Drakari, Scale Singer Nethys promised. The first to learn that monsters can choose to become something better. As the three ancient beings began to move toward the chamber's exit, Tommy realized that he was about to witness something that would change the galaxy forever. The story he had told about Beauty and the Beast was becoming real, but this time it was the Beast who was choosing to break his own curse. 3 months later, Tommy Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed New Terra research station, watching as ships from a dozen different species descended through the atmosphere. The sight still filled him with wonder, even though he had witnessed many such arrivals since the transformation began. The Drakari fleet had not left New Terra after the invasion ended. Instead, they had stayed to help rebuild what their attack had destroyed, working alongside human colonists to create something unprecedented in recent galactic history, a true partnership between former enemies. Tommy, came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen, his mother, approaching with a data pad in her hands and a smile on her face. She had been one of the first prisoners released when Matriarch Vexithara issued her historic command to end the invasion. Finding her son safe and apparently befriended by 3 ancient Drakari had been the shock of her life. The xenobiology team finished their analysis of the cultural exchange protocols, she said, wrapping an arm around her son's shoulders. The Zalani delegation is particularly excited about sharing their atmospheric cultivation techniques with Scale Singer Nethys. Tommy grinned, remembering the delicate crystalline beings who had arrived just yesterday. Their fear of the Drakari had been palpable at first, but when Scale Singer Nethys had sung them the song of welcome in their own harmonic language, several of them had actually wept with joy. Has there been any word from the Galactic Council? Tommy asked. His mother's expression grew more serious. Mixed reactions as expected. About half the member species are cautiously optimistic about the Drakari Reformation movement. The other half think it's either an elaborate deception or a sign that the Empire is weak enough to attack. Tommy nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation better than most 12-year-olds should have to. The transformation of the Drakari Empire was not happening overnight, and it certainly wasn't happening without resistance. Several outer worlds had rebelled against the new policies, declaring themselves independent rather than accept weak leadership that treated other species as equals. Meanwhile, 3 different military factions had attempted to overthrow Matriarch Vexthara, forcing her to defend her reforms with the same strength she had once used for conquest. But the important thing, his mother continued, is that it's working here. New Terra has become a model for what the new alliance could look like. Humans and Drakari working together, sharing knowledge and resources for mutual benefit rather than one dominating the other. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum windows, Tommy could see the evidence of that cooperation. The colony's destroyed buildings had been rebuilt using Drakari architectural techniques that made them both beautiful and nearly indestructible. Human agricultural knowledge combined with Drakari terraforming abilities had turned the previously marginal farmland into rich, productive soil. The research facilities now hummed with joint projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. Tommy, another familiar voice called out, He turned to see scale singer Nethys approaching, her massive form moving with that surprising grace he had learned to associate with her kind. Over the months, he had gotten used to conversing with beings who could accidentally step on him, but he never stopped marveling at how gentle they could be. "The morning song circle is beginning soon," she said, her harmonics making the observation deck's metal walls resonate musically. "Will you be joining us today?" Tommy's face lit up. The daily song circles had become one of his favorite parts of life on New Terra. Each morning, representatives from all the species currently on the planet would gather in the main plaza to share songs, stories, and news from their homeworlds. It was scale singer Nethys's attempt to recreate the ancient Drakari tradition of communal storytelling, adapted for a multi-species community. "Absolutely," he said. "I've been working on a new story I want to tell." "Another fairy tale from Earth?" Scale singer Nethys asked, her eyes glowing with interest. The Drakari had developed a fascination with human folk stories, finding parallels with their own ancient legends. "Not exactly," Tommy said with a mysterious smile. "This one's about a boy who got lost in a cave and met 3 dragons who taught him that monsters and heroes aren't always different people." His mother raised an eyebrow. "That sounds autobiographical." "Maybe a little," Tommy admitted. "But I think it's important for people to know what really happened here. How everything changed because someone was willing to listen and someone else was willing to tell the truth." Scale singer Nethys's massive head tilted in what Tommy had learned was her expression of deep thoughtfulness, truth and listening. "Yes, these are the foundations upon which gardens grow. Your species has a gift for this, young storyteller. Perhaps that is why the universe brought you to our sacred chamber when the ancient songs needed to be awakened." As they made their way to the plaza, Tommy reflected on how much had changed since that terrifying day in the caves. The 3 ancient Drakari had indeed used their authority to transform the invasion of New Terra into something unprecedented. Matriarch Vexithara had personally commanded the release of all human prisoners and the cessation of hostilities. More importantly, she had invited the human colonists to become partners in an experiment that could reshape the galaxy. Not everyone had been convinced at first. Many humans had fled New Terra as soon as transport became available, unable to trust their former attackers regardless of their apparent change of heart. Some Drakari military commanders had resigned their commissions rather than serve in what they saw as a weakened empire. There had been protests, conflicts, and several attempts at sabotage from both sides. But slowly, gradually, the experiment had begun to work. Humans and Drakari discovered they had much to offer each other. Human creativity and adaptability complemented Drakari's strength and ancient wisdom. Human technology, while less advanced in some areas, offered innovative solutions to problems the Drakari had never considered. Meanwhile, Drakari knowledge of stellar engineering and planetary cultivation opened possibilities that humans had only dreamed of. The plaza was already filling with beings from multiple worlds when they arrived. Tommy could see the familiar forms of his human neighbors mixed with the towering shapes of various Drakari. The crystalline elegance of the Zalani, the furry bulk of the Corvin traders, and even a small delegation of the insectoid hive minds who had arrived just last week. At the center of the plaza stood the Songstone, a massive crystal formation that scale singer Nethys had grown using ancient Drakari techniques. When activated by harmonic resonance, it could amplify and translate songs and stories so that every species present could understand them in their own way. Sage Korath was already present, his horned head visible above the crowd. Over the months, he had become the informal leader of the Drakari Education Initiative, working with human teachers to develop curriculum that would help young Drakari learn about the ancient ways alongside practical skills for the modern galaxy. Matriarch Vexithara was notably absent, but Tommy knew she was dealing with another crisis on the Empire's outer rim. A group of human colonies had requested Drakari protection from raiders, but several member species of the Galactic Council had protested, claiming it was just another form of conquest. The diplomatic negotiations were delicate and ongoing. "Citizens of New Terra," scale singer Nethys called out, her voice carrying easily across the plaza without overwhelming the smaller beings present. "Let us begin today's circle with the traditional song of welcome, adapted for our multi-species community." What followed was something that would have been impossible just months earlier. Dozens of different voices joined together in a harmony that transcended species boundaries. The Drakari provided the deep bass notes that resonated in everyone's bones. The Zalani added crystalline high frequencies that seemed to make the very air sparkle. The humans contributed melodies that somehow bridged the gap between all the other sounds. Even the hive minds participated, their collective consciousness creating rhythmic patterns that tied everything together. When the song ended, the plaza was filled with a sense of peace and unity that Tommy had never experienced anywhere else. This was what the galaxy could be, he realized. This was the garden that the ancient Drakari had tried to cultivate before fear and misunderstanding turned them into conquerors. "Who has a story to share today?" Scale singer Nethys asked. A young Corvin engineer stepped forward to tell a humorous tale about a miscommunication between species that had led to accidentally building a water treatment plant upside down. A Drakari scholar shared a recently rediscovered legend about the first cooperation between different clutches on the homeworld. A human botanist described her success in cross-pollinating earth roses with Zalani crystal flowers. Finally, it was Tommy's turn. As he stepped up to the songstone, he looked out at the assembled beings and felt a profound sense of responsibility. These people had gathered because they believed in the possibility of change, of transformation, of choosing love over fear. His story had started all of this, and he wanted to honor that legacy. 3 months ago, he began, his young voice carrying clearly through the crystal's amplification. "I was just a scared kid hiding in a cave.